Collage art is a quick way to explain the concept of a project. Today's project is adaptive reuse of a cement factory, and we want to see what steps this collage has gone through from scratch to the final work. The first step is to open Photoshop and set the project size, import the desired layers. Now I roughly adjust the scale and add the next layer, trying to find the initial structure of the work. I add following layers and try to maintain the order of the layers. Then I start by selecting the parts that I want, add a mask to the desired layer, and start selecting the parts with the object selection tool. I try several times to select the area. And finally, with the lasso tool, I make a more precise selection of the area that I need. After selecting the area, if you press Shift, Ctrl and I, the selected area is inverted by adding black color to that area. Here I did it with Alt and Backspace. The selected part is removed and turned into a cutout. I adjust the size of the work and apply a hue and saturation adjustment, reducing the saturation to make the layers desaturated. So after reducing the saturation, I try to work on the consistency of the work and blend the layers more. So I add the next layer, and just like before, select the area with the object selection tool and refine it with the lasso tool. Mask it, invert the selection with Shift Ctrl I, and I add a black color to remove the surrounding parts. Again, I try to find the appropriate position and see what the composition of the work looks like. Then I add a next layer, remove the extra parts, find the appropriate position, and again precisely select the work with the lasso tool. I adjust the scale of the work and roughly finalize it. So the next step is to work with hue and saturation. Here I reduce the saturation to test and see how the layers mix together. So I add the next layer and following the same steps as before, select, convert to cutout and place the layer below the adjustment layer to apply the saturation effect. Here I can go back into hue and saturation, enter the older style section, and automatically add an older style to the work. You can also adjust the layer opacity from here. So I add another hue and saturation adjustment, check the colorize option and choose a brownish color to add to the work. For example, this color is fine. So in the end, you can adjust the opacity of this new adjustment layers to increase or decrease its impact. If you pay attention, we have now 3 hue and saturation layers, each with a different settings, which ultimately affects all the layers below them. Alright, at this stage, I select the mask section of the layer, and by pressing the B key, which is the brush tool, and using the white color, I try to more precisely select the smoke, ensuring the edges are rounded. Now I attempt to apply brightness and contrast to the layer. Then I hold down the Alt key between the layers and click to create a clipping mask between the two layers, locking the upper layer onto the lower layer. After clipping, I make the necessary adjustments. I add another adjustment layer and also lock it onto the lower layer. If you notice, various adjustment layers are locked onto it, affecting only that specific layer. Okay, great. Now I select the main layer with the workers and copy it using Ctrl+J. I move the copied layer down and hide it in case I need it later. I convert the main layer to a smart object and use the blending option to add a stroke effect, which creates an outline around the layer. You can adjust the size from the top section and the color from the bottom section. So click OK. If you notice a small issue, you can mask the layer again and use the brush tool to remove the area with an appropriate color. Now I enlarge it so that the dimensions of the work are approximately aligned with the other layers. After adjusting the worker's layer, I bring it another layer, and similar to the previous layers, first turn them into cutouts and remove the white background. I place them in their appropriate position, use the transform tool to flip the layer and apply the same adjustment as before, such as working with hue and saturation, and lock them onto the layer using clipping mask. The next step is to add noise. First I create a new layer and fill it with black. Then from the filter menu, I go to the noise section and select add noise. I adjust the settings and click OK. I set the blending mode to screen and reduce the layer opacity. If you look closely, you will see that the small white dots have been added to the work. Next, I use the blending option again to change the stroke color. For this stage, I choose green to see how it combines with the other layers. You can also adjust opacity, but for now I keep it at 100%. I add another new layer and follow the same steps as before, such as turning it into a cutout and placing it in its appropriate position using Ctrl+T and the transform command. I adjust the scale of the work. Next, I add a texture to the entire work and try to blend it to achieve a seamless look. So I erase the edges of the texture and merge the two layers together using Ctrl+E. After merging, I press Ctrl+J to copy it, place them side by side, and erase the bordering edges to ensure a seamless appearance. Finally, I try to merge the layers again and move them below the other layers. Exactly like this. So I add a new image to the project and want to replace the previous image with it. I remove the unnecessary parts of the layer and finally add the images to the background of the project. I adjust its position and then using hue and saturation, slightly increase the lightness to make the overall work a bit whiter. So I adjust the opacity and add a new layer. Like the previous layers, I use object selection to select the main part of the work, remove the extra part, and use the filter and blur, especially Gaussian blur, to soften the sharpness and blend it better with the lower layers. So I apply the blur effect and do the same for the other layers. So like this layer, applying Gaussian blur and click OK. So I add another texture to the project, especially a concrete texture. I reduce the opacity and select the curves from the adjustment. And to add contrast, I lock this adjustment layer to the original layer using a clipping mask, increasing the contrast a bit more. Finally, I set the blending mode of the layer to darken and further reduce the opacity so that only the dirty, dusted effect of the layer is visible. Exactly. After completing this step, I import the next layer and cut it out again, aiming to achieve a clean cutout like the other layers. I apply the same adjustment as before. Again, hue and saturation, blur, and other previous settings. Then I add a new layer. The process and techniques for objects remain the same, and with a few repetitions you will find that it's quite easy to work with and seamlessly integrate objects into the scene and edit them. So here I cut out this object again, apply blur, and adjust the layer's position accordingly. Now it's time to add the main hull structure. After adding the layer, I position it symmetrically in the center of the work and temporarily remove the unnecessary parts to give it a 3D effect. So for example, I remove some parts of the walls and keep the structure, reducing the opacity a bit. I want to add the chimney next, so I clean the outline of it and turn it into a cutout and move the layer below. So I bring in other objects and convert them into cutouts as well. At this stage, I try to complete the hull structure a bit more. So I start by cutting these parts and use the brush to adjust the edge of the work. I place a point, move to the next point and hold down the shift key to draw a line, using it as a guide to make it parallel to the previous line. Finally, I fill in that area and I finish my work. After completing this step, you can reduce the opacity of the layer to make it match better with your work. Once this is done, bring in the next layer, which is the smoke, to be added to the right chimney. Carefully erase around the smoke to position it correctly. So, next step is to erase the top part of the main hull to create a passepartout or frame effect. So I delete them, ensuring it has some distance from the edges, giving the work a more three-dimensional look. Again, remove the unnecessary parts. Then add another layer with wooden pallets to cover the foreground of your work. Cut them out precisely to match the floor and the foreground layers, paying close attention to details for a precise fit. Like this. I think it's good enough. Finally, it's time to add the Rashkan Castle layer to the background, adjust its setting and position it behind the other layers, ensuring it fits well with the overall composition. Next, I focus on the diesel generator. I cut it out, maintaining its abstract look, which fits the atmosphere of the work. I use adjustments to match it with the rest of the composition, primarily working with hue and saturation. Here I aim to keep the structure while removing the wall coverings. Exactly. And after removing the wall coverings, now I add the green space. I position it below the other layers, and once it's in place, use Ctrl+J to duplicate it. I add the green space layer, applying the same blur filter and adjustments as mentioned earlier to seamlessly integrate the greenery into the composition. Alright, so perfect. I'm also adding a layer of a fisherman to the work depending on the atmosphere of my work. I try to do the cropping again and adjust the settings, placing it in the background. After doing this, you can add the next layer and convert it to a cutout, placing it in its appropriate position. After completing this step, I feel that the stroke of the central layer combined with the background and color has been mixed. So I change it again and give it a light gray color, like this. Okay. I think it's appropriate now. Now you can adjust the size as well. Finally, I adjust it and I think it's suitable now. Okay, well, I can use that first layer. I brought it to show the workers in a very abstract way and again place it in its appropriate position as a kind of cutout. Now it's time to add the next layer and place it as a cutout in the background of the work. So I import the layer, add the other layers like this. So alright, I add the other layers exactly like the previous ones at this stage. Now I want to select all the layers and then emphasize the passepartout style that was previously mentioned. So I select all the layers, press Ctrl+T and scale down all the layers so that they have some distance from the edges of the work and have breathing space. So now I try to place the main hull in the center of the work and adjust it like this. Okay. After you've done this, be sure to check the layers to ensure they are correct and don't have any extra parts. Try to adjust the layers inside the work. For example, check if these surrounding layers have been properly placed or not. Okay, after you've done with these parts, you can add a few more layers for the foreground to bring them to the front of the work. If they extend beyond the horizontal line, it might give a more three-dimensional effect. I will add the other layers based on the concept of the work. Again, I select another fisherman, try to make a suitable cutout, add it to the work, and finally try to add a green space on the silos. So you can copy the layer and bring it above to place it on the silos. I will scale it down with transform and adjust its position. Now I can add a mask to the green space layer and by using the lasso tool to select the area that I don't want, fill it with black color, and if you remove the center lock mode, select the original layer and move it, you can easily adjust the position of the object without moving the mask again. Now I will take another copy of it and place it on the silos again, like this. Alright. At this stage, I want to adjust the color of the smoke from the chimney. Again, I can use the hue and saturation adjustment. I will set the hue to green and increase the saturation. The color depends on the project concept, but can be any other color. Now I want to add green space on that part of the chimney again. I bring the green space between two layers. I hold down the Alt key and clipping mask it. At this point, I will add the other layers and we're getting close to the end of the work. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I tried to explain the collage process briefly and quickly. If you liked this tutorial, be sure to like it and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment section and I will try to respond to them as much as possible. Thank you and goodbye.